Chapter 33-31. Master! Du Fan and the others couldn't help but call out again. They were very excited. Xiao Jiu. Guan Shilin walked over from behind and looked at them happily. Xiao Jiu, Mose, long time no see. Brother. Feng Jiu was happy to see him. Brother, when did you come? Are you the only one here? I've been here for a while. I'm the only one here. Come, let's go inside and talk. As Guan Shilin spoke, he looked at Shenyuan Mose and couldn't help but reach out and pat him on the shoulder. It seems that the past 5 years have been very exciting. Although he couldn't see their strength, he could clearly feel that they were much stronger than before. Shenyuan Mose smiled and said, "Not bad. Little Hao don't you recognize me?" Guan Shilin came in front of Hao and reached out to pick him up. The little guy is already so big. Hao call uncle. Feng Jiu smiled and looked at Hao indicating for him to call him uncle. Uncle. Hao called out obediently. Good boy. Guan Shilin rubbed his head and said with a smile. Hao blinked and looked at Guan Shilin curiously. Seeing that he didn't look like his beautiful mother at all, he couldn't help but ask curiously, Uncle, why do you look different from my mother? His mother was so beautiful, but his uncle looked at him, he seemed to be too strong. Was it because he ate too much? Because we're sworn siblings. Naturally, we look different. Guan Shilin said with a smile as he carried him inside. When Hao heard this, his heart skipped a beat. No one knew what he was thinking, but his eyes kept moving between his uncle and his mother. The more he thought about it, the brighter his eyes became. They were not blood-related siblings, just like him. They were not blood-related children, but mother treated him very well, as if he was her own child. Uncle was the same. He was not mother's blood-related elder brother, but mother treated him like a blood-related elder brother. As if he had figured something out, the little guy grinned. Uncle, have you seen Hao before? Yes, when you were little, I even carried you. Guan Shilin said as they walked into the hall. Shenyuan Mose and Feng Jiu went to the main seats and sat down. Everyone else also sat down on the left and right. The servants walked back and forth, serving them tea and pastries before leaving. Yama Lord, Miss Little Master. Elder May walked forward and bowed to them, but his eyes were fixed on Hao Seeing him, Shenyuan Mose didn't say anything. He just picked up his tea and took a sip. Feng Jiu pursed his lips and smiled. Hao looked at him strangely. When he saw his bald head, he seemed to have thought of something and the smile on his face disappeared. He sat quietly in Feng Jiu's arms. Elder May, it's been 5 years. I thought you would leave. I didn't expect you to be waiting here. Feng Jiu sighed softly and his eyes fell on Elder May. 5 years ago, she felt that his cultivation was unfathomable. 5 years later, his cultivation had stagnated. Now, they could see through other people's cultivation with just a glance. This kind of strength and cultivation was the result of their 5 years of cultivation. Elder May heard this and lowered his head. I've been waiting for Miss and Little Master to come back. Chapter 33-32. Her gaze fell on Du Fan's group. She saw that their cultivation levels had also increased. However, compared to Lung Hua's group, they could no longer compare. Thinking of how Lung Hua's group had been cultivating in Dan Wang Valley for the past few years, her gaze changed slightly. Looking at Du Fan's group, she said, It's been hard on you these past few years. Master, it's not been hard on us. Du Fan's group stood up and smiled as they spoke. Looking at Lung Hua's group, their eyes carried a trace of envy. It's just that 5 years have passed, and our strength is no longer as strong as Lung Hua's group. Originally, their strength was about the same. Now, Lung Hua's strength was greater than theirs. They had also stayed in Dan Wang Valley. Thinking about it, they had not been idle for a single moment over the past 5 years. Hearing this, Feng Jiu smiled and said, Take it slow. There's no need to rush. Your strength will not stop here. In the Feng Manor's main hall, everyone was chatting. It was at this time that the sun in the sky seemed to be covered by something. At the same time, a deep and powerful voice came from the sky. Shenyuan Mose. Feng Jiu, it's been 5 years. I never thought that you would dare to return. The voice was like thunder as it spread through the sky above Four Corner City. Every word carried a powerful pressure, causing the citizens of Four Corner City below to cover their heads and hide in all directions. Because the voice in the sky was like thunder, all of Four Corner City was in a state of panic. Because the sun was covered by dark clouds, the sky became dark, causing people to feel fear. Oh no! It must be that Sovereign Tong Tian knows that Fengzhou's group has returned. I never thought that after 5 years, that Sovereign Tong Tian would still keep an eye on the Feng Manor. But why was there no movement when people moved in a while ago? Today, Fengzhou's group just came back and he found out. I just knew it. Fengzhou's group offended that Sovereign Tong Tian. He definitely won't let the matter rest. Look, as soon as they returned, Sovereign Tong Tian immediately knew. 5 years ago, he let them escape. Today, 5 years later, he definitely won't give them another chance to escape. This time, it looks like Fengzhou and the others won't be able to escape. The people of the various families and forces in Four Corner City gathered their spirit power and set up a defensive barrier to block the pressure and ear-splitting sound coming from the sky. Their hearts were beating like drums. Regarding Fengzhou's return, Xifang City was helpless. If she had not returned, perhaps Sovereign Tong Tian would not have targeted them, and they would not have been affected. He was afraid that if they fought, they would bring disaster to the people of Four Corner City. At this time, almost at the same time that the voice in the sky spread, the people of the Blue Star Immortal sect, which was not very far from Four Corner City, also knew that Fengzhou and Shenyuan Mo's, who had disappeared for 5 years, had returned. However, what they did not expect was that the Sovereign Tong Tian would find out about their return after being gone for 5 years. On one hand, they were worried about Fengzhou and Shenyuan Mo's, and on the other hand, they were shocked by the Sovereign Tong Tian's news. It seemed that the Sovereign Tong Tian was very clear about the movements of the various large sections. However, he had not made a move. Perhaps it was because he did not put them in his eyes. Chapter 33:33. In other words, the Sovereign of the Sky-Reaching sect had never taken them seriously. To be able to look down on them, it was obvious that he had the power to completely crush them. This knowledge caused their hearts to become abnormally heavy. Master and the others have returned. Within the sect, CK and Mu Xian quickly walked out of the cave and looked up at the sky covered by dark clouds. They were just discussing matters when they heard a voice come from the sky. That was the Sovereign of the Sky-Reaching sect's voice. In other words, their master had returned. Let's quickly go to Four Corner City's Feng Manor to take a look. As CK spoke, she looked at Mu Xian. Let's go, Mu Xian replied. Her figure flashed and she was already moving forward. Seeing this, CK also quickly followed. The Sovereign of the Sky-Reaching sect knew about their master's return. It could be seen that compared to the experts gathered in their sect, the Sovereign of the Sky-Reaching sect viewed their master as a bigger thorn in his side. Who knew how strong they had become after not seeing them for 5 years? No matter what, they still had to quickly rush to Four Corner City to meet up with their master. At the same time, Fengzhou and Shenyuan Mo's in the Feng Manor heard the voice coming from the sky. The two of them stood up and handed Hauer over to Lung Shuang to take care of before walking out. Looking up at the sky, they saw that the sun was covered by dark clouds. The dark clouds in the sky stirred like an evil dragon swinging its tail, creating a terrifying whirlwind. As the dark clouds swirled, the faint sound of thunder could be heard. At the same time, because of the Sovereign of the Sky-Reaching sect's voice and the pressure he released, a powerful and intimidating pressure descended on their manor like Mount Tai. It made them feel a sense of oppression and suffocation. Shenyuan Mo saw that the pressure from above was pressing down on their manor. At that moment, his hands formed a barrier in front of him. A powerful spiritual aura surged from his hands, and a visible spiritual aura rose up with a faint layer of green light. It formed a protective barrier that protected the Feng Manor within the barrier. At the same time, he called out in a low voice, "Green Dragon!" The deep voice sounded as if it came from ancient times. A powerful pressure with a sharp aura soared into the sky. There was a flash of green light, followed by the roar of a dragon. Roar! The green dragon soared into the sky and opened its mouth, blowing away the dark clouds that were blocking the sun. With a wave of its tail, it slapped towards the wind and clouds. With a loud bang, the wind and clouds were blown away, disappearing into the air. The dark clouds in the sky dispersed and the fierce winds died down. It was as if Sovereign Tongtian, who was hiding in the clouds above, had also calmed down for a while. There was no movement for a long while. Just when everyone below thought that the crisis was over, they heard Sovereign Tongtian's incredulous voice again. "You're already a godly king." In the sky, the sovereign of the sky-reaching sect had left a sliver of his divine sense hidden in the clouds. Because it was only a sliver of his divine sense, even if it was scattered, it wouldn't affect him. However, he never would have thought that Shenyuan Mose, who had just advanced 5 years ago, would actually break through and become a godly king. Chapter 33-34. Sovereign Tongtian's voice rang out from the sky, and it contained a powerful aura of spiritual energy. Therefore, when he spoke, it could be said that the entire Four Corner City, and even the cultivators from the Blue Star Immortal sect, heard him. A godly king expert. These 4 words exploded in everyone's hearts like thunder. The cultivators who originally thought that even if Shenyuan Mose and Fengjie worked together, they would not be a match for Sovereign Tongtian felt their minds go blank when they heard these words. The shock in their hearts was like a waterfall crashing down from a high mountain, creating waves in their hearts and causing countless splashes. They were unable to calm down for a long time in the Feng manner. Elder Mei could not help but widen his eyes in shock when he heard the words from above. That Yama Lord was already a godly king expert? Hiss! How was this possible? What had they done in the past 5 years to obtain such an inconceivable cultivation? In the sky, the black-robed Shenyuan Mose stood on the head of the azure dragon with his hands behind his back. He looked at the clouds with a deep gaze, and a deep voice rang out from his mouth with the pressure of a godly king expert. "Both times we fought, you hid your head and showed your tail. Now that this sovereign is here, do you dare to come out and fight me?" Hearing the challenge, everyone in Four Corner City held their breaths. He actually issued a challenge to Sovereign Tongtian? Well, he was already in existence on the same level as Sovereign Tongtian. Why would he not dare to fight him? However, would Sovereign Tongtian accept his challenge? Would he dare to accept his challenge? It had to be said that at this moment, not only were the people in Four Corner City nervous, but even the various experts who had gathered at the Blue Star Immortal sect felt their hearts thump loudly. They were so nervous that they could not breathe. If Sovereign Tongtian accepted Shenyuan Mose's challenge, it would mean that they had nothing to do. No matter who won or lost after an intense battle, this place would be peaceful for a short period of time. However, now that Shenyuan Mose's strength was at the level of a divine king, would Sovereign Tongtian accept his challenge? The sky seemed to have quieted down for a moment. The atmosphere in the air became more and more gloomy, like the low pressure before a storm. That suffocating atmosphere was very frightening. Ha 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 ha! Wild and wanton laughter came from the depths of the clouds. The sound shook the air and even the ground shook slightly. How many years has it been since someone dared to speak to me like this? Just based on the fact that you, a brat who just entered the divine king level, dared to be this arrogant? Good. This monarch accepts your challenge. This monarch wants to see if you still have the guts to speak such arrogant words when you see this monarch's true body. The voice was gloomy and filled with hostility. His words were filled with viciousness. Clearly, although he was surprised that Shenyuan Mose had managed to break through to the divine king level in the past 5 years, he also felt that even though the other party was a divine king, he could not be mentioned in the same breath as him. Hence, at the moment when his authority was being challenged, he gloomily accepted Shenyuan Mose's challenge. Since he was looking forward to a battle with his true body, why not grant him his wish? Chapter 33-35. Hearing Shenyuan Mose's voice, the sovereign of Tongtian heavily harumphed from the depths of the clouds. Good! 1 month later, at the peak of Shao Mountain, this sovereign will take your head. His voice reverberated in the air until it disappeared completely. The pressure that the sovereign of Tongtian had released also disappeared after his divine sense disappeared. In the sky, Shenyuan Mose descended from the sky on an azure dragon and arrived above the Feng Manor. With a wave of his sleeve, the barrier protecting the Feng Manor was immediately removed. An azure light circled around the Feng Manor once before returning to Shenyuan Mose's body. At the same time, he arrived beside Fengjiu. Fengjiu held his hand and looked at Leng Hua and Du Fan. You two take care of the manor's matters. He believed that it wouldn't be long before the Feng Manor would be bustling with people again. Yes, the two of them responded and dismissed the crowd. At this time, Fengjiu, Shenyuan Mose and Guan Shilin were sitting in the hall. Just as they were talking, they heard that the Shao family had arrived. Because of CK and his relationship with the Shao family, Fengjiu thought for a bit, then waved his sleeve and took out a few spirit fruits from his space. Leng Hua, Master. Leng Hua walked in from outside. Take these spirit fruits and give them to the Shao family. Yes. Leng Hua replied and took the spirit fruits. He put them on a tray and walked outside. Du Fan and the Shao family's head were talking outside. After the Shao family's head handed over the things, he said, "Then I'll be going back first. If there's anything else you need, just let me know." Patriarch Shao, you're exaggerating. Du Fan smiled and said, "Let me send you off." As he spoke, he made a gesture of invitation. Leng Hua came from not far away. Seeing that Du Fan was going to send him out, he called out, "Patriarch Shao, please wait." The two people in front stopped and looked back. When they saw that it was Leng Hua, Master Shao hurriedly bowed respectfully. Butler Leng, Shao family head. These are a few spirit fruits from my master, Leng Hua said with a smile. He handed the tray over and lifted the red cloth on it. Under the surprised gaze of the Shao family head, he said, "This fruit is a longevity fruit. It blossoms every 500 years and bears fruit every 500 years. It can increase one's lifespan and cultivation." Hearing those words, the Shao family's master was pleasantly surprised. Of course, he had heard of the longevity fruit before. That fruit was extremely precious, and every single one of them was priceless. Yet there were actually 4 of them on the tray, and they were even gifted to him. How could he not be pleasantly surprised? "Thank you, Miss Feng. Thank you." He extended his trembling hands and received the fruits. He could not hide the excitement in his heart. This was not only because of the fruits. It was also because after all these years, he had finally made Fengjiu remember him and the Shao family. "Send Master Shao off," Leng Hua said to Du Fan. After nodding at Master Shao, he turned around and left. "Master Shao, please," Du Fan said with a smile. "Yes, yes." He hurriedly and carefully put away the 4 fruits. Only then did he follow Du Fan out of the Feng Manor and towards the Shao family. Not long after Master Shao left, 2 figures appeared in the sky. Not long after, they arrived outside the Feng Manor's gates. Du Fan, who was about to turn around and leave, smiled when he saw the 2. "Sovereign CK, Sovereign Mu Xian. We're here to see Master." The 2 looked at Du Fan and said. Chapter 33-36. In the hall, Guan Shilin looked at Shenyuan Mose and asked, "You issued a challenge to the sovereign of the Skirich sect and agreed to meet at the peak of Mount E. How confident are you in defeating him?" Just as the sovereign of the Skirich sect had said, Shenyuan Mose had just entered the Divine King realm, while the sovereign of the Skirich sect had advanced many years ago. Guan Shilin had to admit that he was a little worried about the 2 of them fighting. This was a battle to the death. The slightest carelessness could cost one's life. Shenyuan Mose lifted his teacup and took a sip of tea. He said unhurriedly in a low voice, 70%. "Brother, don't worry. We'll have to face this battle sooner or later. Mose and I plan to prepare for our wedding once this matter is settled." Fengjiu's gaze fell on Shenyuan Mose as he spoke. She hadn't even made a move when the sovereign of the Skirich sect had appeared today because she believed that Mose's current cultivation level was enough for him to face the sovereign of the Skirich sect. Moreover, it had only been a wisp of the sovereign of the Skirich sect's consciousness that had appeared today. No one would dare to provoke them in the upcoming battle in a month's time. "Master, Supremacy CK and the others are here." Lung Hua's voice rang out from outside the hall. Let them in, Feng Zhou said as he looked at the two people walking in. Greetings, masters. CK and Mu Xian bowed respectfully. Have a seat. Feng Zhou gestured. He looked at the two of them and asked, Why are you here? We saw the sovereign of the Skirich sect and wanted to rush over to take a look, CK said as he looked at Shenyuan Mose and Feng Zhou. He asked, Master, are you all well? Feng Zhou smiled and said, If we weren't well, we wouldn't be sitting here to see you. CK smiled sheepishly when he heard this. He knew it was unnecessary to ask this question. Master Shenyuan and Sovereign of the Skirich sect are going to fight at the peak of Mount E. Do you need us to prepare anything? Mu Xian asked. Mount E had a steep terrain and its peak so high that it seemed to reach the clouds. He was a little surprised that they would choose such a place for the battle. The steeper the terrain, the more careful one had to be during a battle. I've heard that your sect has gathered cultivators from all over the world to fight against Sovereign of the sect? Shenyuan Mose's deep eyes as he asked, his dark eyes on Mu. Yes, this is the countermeasure that the suzerains of the other sects have discussed. The original plan of each sect was like this. Mu Xian simply told them about the plan of the other suzerains. Finally, he said, Therefore, I asked Master, should we let them all cultivate in Mount G? To be to the Mount sect to the Mount sect. Of the other cultivators Mount of the sect, Inzas. Shenyuan Mose said slowly, When the God Kings fight, the pressure will spread and harm the weaker cultivators. If they want to go, they can only go to the foot of the mountain. Yes, I'll report this to the sect master and ask him to make the arrangements. Mu Xian replied. I haven't introduced you yet. This is my older brother, Guan Shilin. Feng Zhou looked at Guan Shilin and smiled. Brother, these are my and Zay's disciples, CK and Mu Xian. Guan Shilin nodded. He had been looking at the two of them since he came here. He had heard about the two of them and felt that they were quite pleasing to the eye. Chapter 33-37. You don't have to be so courteous, Guan Shilin said with a smile. My sister is your master, but I'm not. You can just be friends with me. Hearing this, CK and Mu Xian looked at each other. They were just thinking about how they should address him. Now that he heard him say this, his heart relaxed. He cupped his hands and said, Thank you for not abandoning us. Brother Guan. Let's call each other brothers. Brother CK, Brother Mu. Guan Shilin cupped his hands in return and invited them to sit down. They chatted in the hall for a while. After a while, Lung Hua came in. Master, the kitchen has prepared some food and wine. Would you like to eat now? Okay. Feng Zhou nodded. CK and Mu Xian stood up and said, Master, we have to go back to the Xiao family. Now that there's nothing else to do here, we'll take our leave. Don't you want to stay for dinner? Feng Zhou looked at them. No. They shook their heads. They knew that they had just come back and needed to gather, so they didn't want to disturb them. Let me see you out. Guan Shilin stood up and said to Feng Zhou and Shenyuan Mose, I'll see them out. With this, he gestured to CK and Mu Xian to leave. The two bowed slightly and walked out with Guan Shilin. On the way, the three chatted for a while. After they left, Guan Shilin turned around and walked in. Du Fan. Tell the servants to put the food and wine in the shade under the tree over there. Guan Shilin pointed to a tree in the front yard and said with a smile, Let's gather and eat something. Let them rest first. Okay. Du Fan responded and ordered the servants to prepare. Just as he was about to go to the kitchen to see how things were going, he saw a figure come in through the door. Old Jiang? Du Fan looked at him in surprise. He turned around and walked towards him. Why are you here? This old Jiang was the old man who had come to ask for the rank 6 origin-breaking pill. Back then, his master had him gather medicinal ingredients to exchange for a rank 6 pill. Later on, his master left, and this matter was left to him to handle. It was also because of this that when Elder Jiang gathered the medicinal ingredients and could not find anyone in the Feng Manor, he, who had received the news, contacted him. Later on, after examining the medicinal ingredients, he gave him a rank 6 origin-breaking pill. Ever since that incident, He hadn't appeared in front of them for a long time. They didn't expect him to come today. He probably heard the news of Master's return, so he came to take a look. Manager Du, when Elder Jiang saw him, he hurriedly cupped his hands and bowed, saying, "I heard that the ghost doctor has returned, so I came specially to thank her." As he spoke, he added, "I have been traveling outside recently and obtained a precious spirit medicine, so I wanted to give it to the ghost doctor." Hearing this, Du Fan smiled and said, "Since it's like this, then please come in." He gestured for him to come in and brought him to the front yard. Feng Jiu, Shen Yuan Mose, and Guan Shilin were sitting under a tree in the yard. Lung Shuang brought Hauer over. Qin Xian was also waiting on the side. "Master, Elder Jiang said he wanted to personally come and thank you, so I invited him in," Du Fan said with a smile and turned his head slightly to look at Elder Jiang. Chapter 33-38. Seeing him, Feng Jiu didn't immediately recall who he was. It wasn't until he said those words that she remembered that he was the person who had asked for the Dan back then. Her gaze swept over him and she smiled. "That 6th level Dan of the origin was exchanged with your spiritual medicine. There's no need to thank me. It's just an equal exchange." No, it was because of the ghost doctor's Dan that changed me. If it wasn't for that Dan back then, I wouldn't be alive to see the ghost doctor right now. As he spoke, he took out an item from his space and handed it to Du Fan, saying, "I know that the ghost doctor likes rare and precious spiritual medicines. I obtained this when I was traveling outside. Please accept it." Du Fan placed the item on the table and retreated to the side. Feng Jiu raised her eyebrows after hearing this, but didn't open the jade box. Instead, she looked at Elder Jiang and said, "The Dan back then was exchanged with your spiritual medicine. If I accept your spiritual medicine now, it's a little. The ghost doctor's kindness in saving my life, how could it be repaid with a mere spiritual medicine on a list? I ask the ghost doctor to accept this spiritual medicine. I'm someone who doesn't understand alchemy. This spiritual medicine would be a waste if left with me. Only the ghost doctor can make use of its full potential." As he spoke, he bowed towards them, saying, "I came today to personally thank the ghost doctor. I'll take my leave first." As he spoke, he didn't wait for Feng Jiu to say anything, and hurriedly left, as if he was afraid that she wouldn't accept the spiritual medicine. Seeing him leave in a hurry, Feng Jiu couldn't help but smile. She opened the jade box, saying, "What kind of spiritual medicine is it?" When she saw the spiritual medicine inside the jade box, her eyes couldn't help but shrink. "It's actually a life-saving immortal herb." Guan Shilin took a look and asked in astonishment, "Life-saving immortal herb? Used to save lives?" He didn't understand spiritual medicine and didn't know what it was used for. Feng Jiu smiled and picked up the life-saving immortal herb from the box. "This is indeed a life-saving immortal herb. It's very precious and can only be found by chance." What was even rarer was that due to the maintenance of the jade box, this life-saving immortal herb was still verdant and green. There was even a small lump of black soil wrapped around its roots. In other words, she could plant this spiritual herb in her space, and in the future, it would be able to display its greatest medicinal effects. With a turn of her hand, she planted the immortal herb into the medicinal field in her spatial space. Then, she put away the jade box and said, "This Elder Jiang has given me something good. That old man was right. No matter how precious an elixir is, only in your hands will it be able to unleash its full potential." Guan Shilin said with a smile. He poured them a glass of wine and said to Qin Xian, "Go and ask the kitchen staff to serve the dishes first." "Yes." Qin Xian responded and turned to leave. "Mother." Hauer came to Feng Jiu's side and leaned into his mother's embrace. "Hauer, have a good rest today. Mother will take you out to play tomorrow." She picked him up and let him sit on her lap. Shen Yuan Mose glanced at them, then looked at Hauer and said, "Hauer, you're a boy and you're already so big. How can you let your mother carry you all the time? Sit by yourself." Chapter 33-39. Feng Jiu glanced at Shen Yuan Mose. She felt that he was too strict with Hauer. He was just a child. It was nothing. However, since he had already said so, she didn't say anything more. She just smiled and carried Hao-er to a chair at the side. Then Hao-er will sit here. Mother will help you get some food later. When Hao-er heard this, he immediately smiled happily. Yes, yes, Hao-er will help mother get some food too. Hao-er is so obedient. Feng Zhou touched his delicate little face and praised. Not far away, Elder Mei, who was helping to bring the dishes over, saw this scene and felt a little sour in his heart. The little master grew up by the side of the ghost doctor and Yama Lord and was as close as a family to them. He wondered if he would be unwilling to be close to his biological parents in the future when he met them. He had already sent a message to his master. He wondered when they would come down to take a look. Thinking of this, he put away his thoughts and walked forward with a smile. The dishes are here, the dishes are here. They're piping hot. They've just been prepared. He placed the dishes on the table. The servants also brought the dishes over. Not long after, the table in the courtyard was filled with dishes and wine. Everyone also sat down. This toast is to everyone. Feng Zhou held the wine cup and gestured to everyone. She drank it in one gulp. Everyone also stood up and raised their cups to return the toast. As they drank, everyone started chatting. They all talked about what happened in the past 5 years. There were fewer people sitting at Feng Zhou's table. At this moment, Hao-er was picking up a piece of meat and putting it in Feng Zhou's bowl. Mother, eat. Hao-er is so obedient. Feng Zhou smiled and patted his head. She also picked up a piece of meat for him and said, Hao-er, eat more so that your body will grow. Yes, yes, Hao-er replied. He took 2 mouthfuls of food and looked at Shenyuan Mose and Guan Shilin. Thus, the little guy also picked up some food for them. Father, eat. Uncle, meat. Shenyuan Mose saw him reach his hand over, so he picked up the bowl and took the food. Only then did he say, sit down and eat. Little Hao-er, you're much more obedient than the little rascal at Uncle's house, Guan Shilin said with a smile. He picked up his bowl and took the food that Hao-er put in his bowl. At the same time, he also gave him a drumstick. Hearing this, Hao-er blinked. Uncle has a rascal in his family? Feng Zhou also looked at him and asked with a smile. Brother, I haven't asked you yet. How many children do you have now? He and Yi Jing had been married for several years. If they had 1 child each year. Looking at Feng Zhou's expression, Guan Shilin knew what she was thinking. He coughed lightly and said with a smile, Look at what you're asking. What do you mean by how many children we have now? Your sister-in-law and I only have 1 son now. He's only 4 years old and he's always so naughty. Feng Zhou could not help but laugh. Only 1? I thought you would have 2 or 3. We were thinking of waiting for the child to grow up and have another one. We can't take care of 1. Guan Shilin grinned. Thinking of his wife and son at home, the happy smile on his face naturally overflowed. Shenyuan Mose, who was listening at the side, had a slightly deep look in his eyes, especially when Feng Zhou said that he thought Guan Shilin would have 2 or 3 children. He could not help but think. When he and Zhou get married in the future, would they have 2 children in 3 years? Or 3 in 4 years? Or would they only have 1 child and wait for the child to grow up? Chapter 3340. As Feng Zhou and Guan Shilin spoke, they seemed to have thought of something. Suddenly, they looked at Shenyuan Mose and asked, When we get married, will we get married here, or will we go back? Hearing this, Shenyuan Mose smiled and said, Do you want to go back, or do you want to do it here? What did you originally plan to do? Feng Zhou looked at him and asked, I originally wanted to hold a grand wedding here and bring my parents and relatives over. However, we can also go back to the Phoenix dynasty. You can also get married from home. It depends on what you like. As Shenyuan Mo spoke, he thought to himself that when they got married, there were still many things that needed to be taken care of. Even after the battle with the sovereign of Tongtian was over, there were still many things that needed to be taken care of, especially since he had to personally prepare the betrothal gifts for her. He wanted the wedding to be grand, so there were even more things that needed to be prepared. As for where they would get married, he felt that the most important thing was still her decision. Hearing this, Feng Zhou's heart warmed. She smiled until her eyes narrowed and her face was filled with joy. It's too far to bring them over. Also, they're already used to a peaceful life. Rather than rushing all the way, why don't we go back and get married? I'll get married from home. That's even better. After all, that was where she grew up. Getting married from the Phoenix Dynasty's Feng Manor was the most suitable place. Hearing this, Shenyuan Mose nodded. All right, we'll do as you say. After the battle at Shao Mountain is over, we'll have someone pick an auspicious day. She replied with a smile. Come, come, come. Let's eat. Guan Shilin laughed loudly. Thinking that they were finally going to pick a day to get married, he was very happy. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, he ordered the servants in the manor to pack their things. Aside from Du Fan and the others, Feng Zhou and the others went to rest first. The next morning, in the Feng Manor, Hao blinked and looked at the tattered beggar's clothes. He tilted his head and asked his mother, Mother, why do we have to dress like this when we go out to play? Because his mother promised him yesterday that she would take him out to play today. He got up early and picked out his favorite set of clothes. However, when he arrived at his mother's place, the clean clothes on his body were taken off and changed into the ragged clothes of a beggar that had been washed until it was white. He was only 5 or 6 years old, so he couldn't help but wonder. Did Dan Wang have to dress like this when he went shopping outside the valley? Feng Zhou helped him put on his clothes and messed up his neatly combed hair. Then, he put on some simple makeup on his fair and delicate face. His fair skin became dark, and the simple makeup made it impossible to see his original appearance. That's about it. Feng Zhou nodded with satisfaction. Mother, how do I go shopping like this? Hao blinked and looked at her in confusion. Feng Zhou's lips curled into a smile as she said, Mother will take you shopping and out to play. We're not going to sit in a spirit deer carriage and go out dressed to the nines. She reached out and gently flicked his forehead as she said, You're new to the world. Mother will teach you how to see the world. Hao didn't really understand, but he knew that his mother wouldn't harm him. Thus, he listened to her and did as she said. Chapter 33:41. Xiaojiu, why did you make Hao look like a little beggar? You're not thinking of letting him go out like this, are you? Guan Shilin walked in, took a chair, and sat at the side. Seeing Hao confused look, he couldn't help but shake his head inwardly. Although Hao was smart, a 5 or 6-year-old child like him probably wouldn't be able to take it after a while. Uncle, Hao called out and then looked at his mother. Feng Zhou patted Hao's messy hair, smiled, and said to Guan Shilin, Only by letting him be at the lowest level can he see things that those at the top can't. Training has to start from a young age. Hao has been with us for all these years, and Zeiku and I have not spoiled him. I think he should get used to it very quickly. As she spoke, she squatted down and looked at Hao saying, Hao, Mother wants to see if you can survive by yourself when you're alone. So I'll give you 10 days. In these 10 days, you can't use anything in your space. The only thing you can use is the dagger tied to your calf. You have to find a way to survive without anything. You have to learn how to resolve crises by yourself. You have to find food to fill your stomach. But remember one thing, if you have good intentions, you can't do evil. In these 10 days, you have to live by yourself in Sifang City. You can't tell anyone that you're my son. You can only exist as a little beggar. You can only come home after 10 days. Can you do it? Feng Zhou looked at the stunned Hao and asked softly. Hearing her words, Hao thought for a moment and nodded. Yes, Hao can do it. He thought that 10 days should not be difficult. It could only be said that the little guy had never tried living alone and thought too simply of things. Okay, then Mother will have someone send you out. She touched his head and smiled, then called out to the outside, Lung Hua, Master. Lung Hua walked in from outside. Send Hao out of the residence. Find a place to put him down, and come back. Feng Zhou ordered. Yes. Lung Hua responded. He went forward to pick up Hao and walked out. At this moment, Hao, who was being carried, seemed to have just regained his senses. He couldn't help but ask, Mother, mother, what if Howard misses you? Fengzhou smiles faintly. Then just keep it in your heart. When you come back, mother will prepare something delicious for you. All right. He replied with a smile and allowed Lung Hua to carry him away, silently leaving the Feng manor. Guan Shilin was stunned as he watched the child being sent out of the residence. He said, Xiaojiu, are you really not worried about letting a child like him stay outside for 10 days? Nothing will happen, right? Fengzhou walked out and stood in the courtyard, saying, I already had Luo Yu secretly follow him. In these 10 days, with him watching over him, nothing will happen. As she spoke, she sighed, Brother, Hao Er's background is not simple. The dangers he will face in the future will not be any less than if he were by our side. There will come a day when he will return to his birth parents' side. If we let him go back, we won't be by his side to protect him. We can only teach him how to recognize people and adapt accordingly. Only like this can he survive the dangers in the future. Chapter 33-42. Brother, I haven't sparred with you in a long time. Let's go to the back of the mountain, shall we? Fengzhou said with a smile. Sparring with you? Guan Shilin shook his head and said with a smile. You are now a godly king expert. Wouldn't I be looking for trouble if I fought with you? No. I originally wanted to accompany you out for a walk. Since you've sent Hao Er out, I'll go find Du Fan and the others to spar with. As he spoke, he walked out. If you want to spar, go spar with Moze. You'll be evenly matched if you two spar. Seeing Guan Shilin leave the courtyard in the blink of an eye, Fengzhou couldn't help but shake her head and laugh. Really, even if it's just sparring, I won't go all out. As she spoke, she walked out, planning to talk to Elder Mei about Hao Er. On the other side, in an alley in Four Corner City, Lung Hua put Hao Er down and said, I'll leave you here. Your mother wants you to train in Four Corner City. For the next 10 days, you'll stay in this city. As for where you stay, that's up to you. Lung Hua looked at Hao Er, who was blinking at him. He paused for a moment, then took out 2 steamed buns wrapped in paper from his space and put them in his hands. He said gently, You haven't eaten anything this morning, right? Have a steamed bun to fill your stomach first. As for your next meal, you'll have to figure it out yourself. Thank you, Uncle Hua. He took the steamed bun and thanked him. Then I'll go now. Be careful and don't trust strangers so easily. Lung Hua patted his head and left in a flash. After he left, he was the only one left in the alley with 2 steamed buns. He thought for a moment, then walked to the side and sat down. He picked up one of the steamed buns and ate it, then put the other one away and stuffed it into his clothes. He ate the steamed buns without water or porridge. This made it difficult for him, who was used to eating good food, to swallow. The more he ate, the slower he became. In the end, he took the remaining half of the steamed bun and walked out of the alley. Steamed buns. Freshly baked steamed meat buns. Hao Er's eyes lit up when he heard the hawker's voice. Meat bun? Meat buns were much more delicious than steamed buns. There was meat inside the meat buns. Unknowingly, he walked with his short legs to the stall selling meat buns. Looking at the steaming meat buns on the rack, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. He had just come out, so why did the meat buns smell so fragrant? Could it be that the things outside the mansion were more fragrant? Go. Where did this little beggar come from? Go. Don't get in the way of my business this early in the morning. When the peddler saw a dirty little beggar standing in front of him, he immediately came forward to chase him away. Hao Er was pushed to the side by him. He stood in the corner and watched. He saw the fierce-looking hawker greet the customers who came forward to buy buns with a smile in the blink of an eye. Although he was young, he was smart. Moreover, he had learned a lot from Fengzhou and Shenyuan Mo's. When he saw the difference in treatment between the hawker's front and back, he instantly understood the crux of the matter. He was a little beggar. He couldn't afford to buy the meat buns, so there was no profit for the hawker. Therefore, he treated them with a nasty face. The hawker greeted the customers with a smile because they bought his buns and he could make money. That was why he was so polite to them. Chapter 33:43. Would it be fine as long as he didn't starve and could survive for the next 10 days? If that was the case, it shouldn't be difficult, right? After thinking about it, he walked along the main street. After living in the valley for a few years, it was his first time walking the main street in the city. Everywhere looked new and interesting. However, as soon as he approached the places where people were doing business, he was chased away. Perhaps it was because he was young, a little beggar who wandered around the city alone. Therefore, two men in the streets and alleys of the city had their eyes on him. Seeing the little beggar walk past in front of them, the two men signaled with their eyes and quietly followed him. How who was still looking at the interesting things on the main street, didn't know that he was being watched until he came to a corner and a man came forward to stop him. "Little brother, why are you alone?" How stopped and looked at the shifty-looking man in front of him. He couldn't help but frown. "Get out of my way." He didn't know him. "Little brother, you haven't eaten yet, right? Look, I have a roasted chicken leg. Here, eat it." The man took out a chicken leg wrapped in oil paper and handed it to him. Although he hadn't eaten anything else in the morning and his stomach was growling when he smelled the aroma of the chicken leg, he still shook his head. "No need, I've eaten." His mother said that one who was unaccountably solicitous was hiding evil intentions. This person must be a bad person. Instinctively, he stared at him defensively and even took a step back. However, who knew that a gunny sack would suddenly be put over him? Then, he only felt a pain in his neck and lost consciousness. "Go, go, go!" The two men saw that there was no one around the corner and immediately carried him away. A child in a gunny sack who was unconscious and motionless naturally wouldn't attract the attention of others. Even if they did, they would only think that they were carrying goods. However, Luoyu, who was watching from the dark, saw this and a chill flashed through his eyes. He quietly followed them and wanted to see how would deal with it. After all, his master had instructed him not to make a move unless it was absolutely necessary, and to let him try to solve it himself. At this time, Wanyan Chenhua had just arrived at Four Corner City. She, who was in the sect, had heard that Fengjiu and the others had returned. She should have come yesterday, but she was delayed by some matters, so she came early this morning. Walking along the main street of the city, she suddenly smelled the fragrance of braised meat. She wanted to buy some braised meat and go to the Feng Manor to find Fengjiu to drink some wine. Thus, she turned around and went in the direction of the fragrance. Putting away the braised meat she had bought into her space, she prepared to go to the Feng Manor. However, she saw a figure that could not be considered unfamiliar silently pass by. It did not startle the people on the street in the slightest. "Isn't that Xiao Zhou's man? Who is he following?" Wanyan Chenhua murmured softly and followed him to take a look. Luoyu followed the two men to the slums. He concealed his aura and hid in a big tree as he watched the two men bring Hao into a dilapidated house. Suddenly, he seemed to have sensed something. A fierce look flashed across his eyes as he instantly attacked behind him. Wanyan Chenhua was startled and instinctively raised her hand to block his attack. At the same time, she said, "It's me, Wanyan Chenhua." When he saw the person in front of him, Luoyu stopped his attack. He was startled and asked, "Young Miss Wanyan, why is it you? Why are you here?" Chapter 33:44. Seeing that it was her, Luoyu relaxed and said, "I was ordered by Master to secretly guard Little Master." He briefly told her about what his master had told him. Finally, he said, "Because the young master was captured by two men in a sack and brought here, I followed him. I didn't expect to be noticed by Miss Wanyan. With his current cultivation, ordinary people wouldn't be able to discover him." However, when he looked at Wanyan Chenhua in front of him and thought of the rumors about her in the past 5 years, he felt relieved. Her cultivation wasn't considered weak, so it was normal for her to be stronger than him now. Hearing Luoyu's words, Wanyan Chenhua chuckled. "Your master is really different from ordinary people. That child is only 5 or 6 years old, yet she is willing to let him out to suffer. Master is doing it for little master's sake." As Luoyu spoke, his gaze shifted from her to the house in front of them. Because the house here was more dilapidated and he was standing on a high tree, he could see the scene in the house's courtyard. He stood guard here. Seeing that Wanyan Qianhua didn't leave, he couldn't help but ask, "Miss Wanyan, are you going to the residence?" "It's fine. It won't be too late to go after I see what a Jew's child is like." She found a place to sit down, her red dress hidden among the lush leaves. Hearing her words, Luo Yu didn't speak again. Instead, he looked at the scene in the courtyard in front of them. In the dilapidated courtyard, a man put the gunny sack on the ground. Another man beside him shouted, "Hurry up and let the little demon out, lest he suffocates to death." "Don't worry, he won't suffocate to death. This gunny sack can ventilate," the other man said disapprovingly. After catching his breath, he bent down to untie the gunny sack and dragged the child out. "This brat is still unconscious." The man kicked Hao with his foot. "Bring him inside first. We'll talk when he wakes up." As the other man spoke, he picked Hao up from the ground and walked inside. Hao felt like he was thrown onto a hard bed. He didn't open his eyes and maintained his calm breathing. He listened to their conversation as they closed the door. When the room was quiet, he opened his eyes and sat up. He was captured by bad people. He blinked his eyes and pursed his lips. He wasn't worried about his situation. Instead, he was worried that if his mother and father knew that he was captured by bad people, would they be disappointed in him? Thinking of this, he started to think about it. He looked around the room. He was looking for an escape route. He estimated the strength of the two people and his chances of escaping. Escape? Could he escape? His mother had told him that he had to think twice when encountering problems. Running away was the last resort. He should not think about running away unless it was absolutely necessary. He had to learn how to solve problems. His parents had taught him a lot of things, and with his cultivation, he reckoned that as long as he was careful and not careless, he would be able to deal with those two bad guys. But he'll just wait and see. Why did they capture him and bring him here? Were they going to sell him? Thinking of this, he lay on the bed and continued to pretend to be unconscious while listening to the sounds outside. After a long time, the sounds outside gradually became lively, and from the sound of it, it seemed to be the voices of some children. Chapter 33:45. Brat! That kick wasn't light, and it hurt so much that he opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, he was lifted up and dragged outside. He patted that person's hand with a panicked look. "What are you doing? Let me go." "TSK. Brat, you'd better be obedient since you're in our hands. Otherwise, I'll break your legs." That man swung his hand and threw Hao to the ground. Only then did Hao see that there were 11 little beggars standing in the shabby little courtyard. Some looked 1 or 2 years older than him, and some looked even younger than him. They were all wearing tattered clothes and had messy hair. They were all thin and dry as if they could not eat their fill. At this moment, these little beggars looked at him and then curled up into a ball to look at the two men. There was a trace of cowardice and fear between their brows. Hao who was sitting on the ground, glanced at those beggars and then looked at the two men. "Why did you capture me?" He was young and had never experienced such things. He did not know why these two men had captured him and gathered him together with these beggars. He originally thought that they wanted to sell him, but it did not seem like it. The two men glanced at him and then looked at the beggars. "Where's the money you begged today? Take it out." As he spoke, a whip appeared in his hand. Looking at that whip, fear appeared in the eyes of those little beggars. They hurriedly took out all the money in their bags. Some even took out a steamed bun that they begged for and placed it in front of them. Hao looked on in confusion. Suddenly, he saw that the man with the whip suddenly whipped the youngest beggar fiercely. He scolded fiercely, "You're the least again. I think you don't want to live anymore." Whoosh! Slap! Wah! Pain, pain. Ooh, woo woo, don't hit me, don't hit me. That little beggar curled up into a ball and cried. From the sound of it, it was a girl. However, that man did not stop because the little beggar was a girl. Nor did he show mercy because the little girl looked to be 5 or 6 years old. On the contrary, every lash of the whip carried a hidden force. It whooshed out and landed on the little girl's curled-up body. Every lash of the whip tore open the little girl's skin and flesh. Hao was stunned by the scene in front of him. He stared at the scene with his eyes wide open. It was only when he saw that the little girl had fallen did he suddenly recover. "Stop it! Stop it!" he shouted angrily, and without a second thought, he rushed forward and stood in front of the little girl. Her hands were tightly clenched into fists in anger, and they were trembling slightly. Her little face, which couldn't be seen clearly, was tense, and her eyes were fixed on the man. Her anger was obvious. "Heh, this little brat dares to stand up? I wanted to teach you a lesson later, but it looks like you're itching for a beating." The man looked at the little beggar who rushed forward and could not help but laugh coldly. He was just a little brat. He could not even protect himself when he did not understand the situation. How could he protect others? It was a good opportunity to teach him a lesson and make him obedient. Chapter 33-46. On a tree not far away, Luo Yu's eyes were full of murderous intent as he watched the scene in the courtyard. He resisted the urge to attack. At this moment, Wanyan Chenhua's voice came from behind. "What's the hurry? Keep watching. This kid is not a weakling," Wanyan Chenhua said as she supported her chin with one hand and watched the scene in the courtyard. Her beautiful eyes flashed slightly, and no one knew what she was thinking. She looked at Hao with some admiration. Of course, Luo Yu was anxious. That was Hao His master and the Yama Lord had never hit him. If he was whipped by these two people, how could he go back and face his master? However, in the next moment, his anxious and worried expression was replaced by astonishment. Hao gritted his teeth and looked angrily at the man who was whipping him. The anger in his heart reached the extreme, so much so that in the next moment, the spiritual aura hidden in his body surged. The small figure carried a surge of spiritual aura and fiercely slammed into the man. Even though he was small, the impact was not light. "Ah!" The man who whipped out the whip was shocked and his whole body was sent flying. However, in the next moment, his whip was also snatched away. Then, a whip containing spiritual aura landed on his body with a snap. "Hiss! Ah! Little brat, you're courting death." The man sucked in a breath of cold air and cursed. His body fell to the ground with a loud bang because of the impact and the whip. The other man standing at the side was stunned. When he came back to his senses, he strode forward and waved his hand to slap Hao. "Brat, you've got guts. My parents couldn't bear to hit me, but you dare to kick me." Hao's childish voice was filled with coldness and anger. He no longer hid his strength and directly whipped the two of them. "Who asked you to kick me? Who asked you to be the bad guys?" Whoosh, whoosh, pa-pa, ah. Every time the whip fell, the two men's flesh would split open and they would scream in pain. The two men tried to resist, but in the end, they couldn't even find a chance to fight back. They had no choice but to scream and beg for mercy. Don't hit us, we know we were wrong." The two of them curled up and begged for mercy. At the same time, they secretly glanced at the child holding the whip. Their hearts were filled with shock. They did not expect that this inconspicuous little brat was already a cultivator. Moreover, he was an immortal cultivator who could hide his cultivation level. This child must have some treasures on him. Thinking of this, the two of them cried and begged. "We really know that we were wrong. We won't dare to do it again. Really, we will let those little beggars go. We won't do this again." Hao looked at the wounds on their bodies and begged and cried as he spoke. For a moment, he could not make up his mind. He thought for a moment and did not continue to hit them. Instead, he used his childish voice to threaten them. "If you continue to be bad guys, I will definitely not let you off. No, we will definitely not be bad guys again." The two of them looked at each other and hurriedly said. Seeing this, Hao turned to look at the little beggar who was curled up in a ball. He walked forward and was about to see how she was doing when the two men behind him took out their knives and fiercely slashed at the little brat whose back was facing them. Chapter 33-47. The two swords reflected the cold light of the sun as they slashed at him. It was a feeling of approaching death, and it made his hair stand on end. He had been trained by his parents for many years, so in this dangerous moment, his body reacted faster than his brain. The spiritual power in his body surged in an instant, and he squatted down at the same time. He reached into his calf with one hand and pulled out the dagger hidden there. Then, he stabbed the dagger from top to bottom into the feet of the two men. The dagger pierced through the man's boots and into his flesh. It seemed that it had even broken the bones of his feet. Hao-er's figure had already dashed past the two men at the same time. He was not even at the man's waist when he suddenly jumped up and sat on the man's shoulder. He covered the man's eyes with one hand and slit the man's neck with the other hand holding the dagger. "I'll kill you." The other man saw that the man had died with his eyes wide open and slashed at Hao-er. However, Hao-er nimbly dodged and stabbed the man's waist with the dagger in his hand. Hiss! The man let out a blood-curdling scream. Due to the injury on his waist, he instinctively bent down. But at this moment, a cold gleam of light flashed in front of his eyes, and he saw a dagger piercing his heart. The man let out a muffled groan as his eyes stared fixedly at the brat in front of him. Even at the moment of his death, he still did not understand how they had fallen into this brat's hands. When Hao-er pulled out the dagger, a column of blood splashed out and sprayed Hao-er's face. He stared blankly at his own hand that was holding the dagger, and at the person who had fallen in front of him. He killed someone? He actually killed someone? For a moment, fear, panic, and helplessness surged in his heart. He did not want to kill anyone, and he had never killed anyone before. He only reacted instinctively when danger came. Those attacks and those moves were all taught by his mother. However, before he even realized it, he had already killed those two people. He stood there in a daze and stared blankly at the two corpses on the ground. He had thought that after beating them up, he would let them go as long as they did not do bad things again. He did not want to kill them, but they wanted to kill him. In his mind, he remembered what his mother had taught him. His mother had said, "Some people should not be merciful when they deserve to be killed. Don't give them a chance to kill you. Be decisive and cut off all future troubles." He thought that his mother was right. He had not done this properly. He had been careless. If not for his body's instinctive reaction, he would have been the one dead. Thinking of this, he gradually calmed down. Looking at the two corpses, he was no longer afraid. He walked forward and took all the valuables from their bodies. His mother had said that this was a spoil of war. This was his spoil of war. After stuffing the things into his clothes, he quickly walked to the little beggar's side. However, when he wanted to help her up, the little beggar shrank back and kept retreating, looking at him with a face full of fear. Hao-er was stunned when he saw the fear in her eyes. He had saved her. Why was she afraid of him? He was young and did not understand. Hence, he thought for a moment and said, "They are dead. They will not hit you again." Chapter 33:48. The human heart was the most difficult thing in the world to understand. Even an old monster that had lived for hundreds of years might not be able to see through it, much less Hao-er, who was only 5 or 6 years old. At such a young age, he pursed his lips and silently glanced at the beggars. With a dark expression, he said to them, "Go dig 2 holes in the back and bury them." Seeing that they were all standing there without moving, he naturally copied his father and put his hands behind his back. Pretending to be a little adult, he coldly shouted, "What are you still standing there for? Didn't you hear what I said?" Being shouted at like this and thinking about how this child who was even shorter than them had just killed the 2 men in front of them, they were shocked and instinctively replied, "Yes, yes." They quickly went forward and hurriedly dragged the 2 corpses to the back. They then began to dig 2 deep holes and buried the 2 men. Not far away, Wanyan Chenhua gently laughed. "This kid's aura is 70% like Mose's. I estimate that if this continues, he will be the next king of hell when he grows up." At this moment, Luo Yu was grinning. His original worries were finally put to rest. Sure enough, Hao-er did not disappoint his master and the Yama Lord. If his master knew, he would definitely be very happy, right? Young Miss Wan Yen, it's already getting late. Luo Yu looked at her with a smile. Wan Yin Qianhua glanced at him and said with a smile, "Enough. Even if you don't chase me away, I will leave. I have no interest in staying here all night." As Wan Yin Qianhua spoke, she waved her sleeve. In the next moment, her figure flashed and she headed in the direction of the Feng Manor. Watching her leave, Luo Yu smiled. He knew that there was no need for him to say anything. Wan Yin Qianhua would tell his master about what she had seen. Thinking of this, his mood improved. He could not help but hum a little tune as he sat in the tree and kept watch. Those two people were already dead. What happened next would depend on what Hao did. Night fell. In the shabby room, Hao looked at the beggars and thought for a bit before asking, "Do you have a home?" The beggars looked at each other and shook their heads. "We are all orphans. If they had a home, they would not have been caught by those two people to help them earn money." Hearing them say that they were orphans, Hao's small brow furrowed. "Those two people are dead. You can go wherever you want. But we don't know where to go. Also, we will starve to death." The younger beggars said this. Hearing this, Hao thought, "Hao's right." The little beggars listened to him and didn't say anything. They just lowered their heads slightly. The youngest girl among them looked up at Hao timidly and asked, Then will you hit us?" As Hao spoke, he thought for a bit then added, "But you must all listen to me. As long as you are obedient, I will guarantee that you will have food to eat." "Okay," everyone agreed. Just like that, the matter was settled. Chapter 3349. Hearing Wan Yin Qianhua tell her about Hao's situation outside today, Fengzhou smiled. "That's good too. This child has been living in seclusion with us and has almost never come into contact with the outside world. I just want him to see the outside world. He will only understand if he experiences it himself. He is young, but I don't think you need to worry. That child is smart." Wan Yin Qianhua played with her hair and leaned lazily on the table. "Sister, you don't know. Hao might leave us soon." Fengzhou sighed softly when she mentioned this. Her voice was filled with reluctance. Wan Yin Qianhua raised her voice with a hint of charm. "What's going on?" "Hao's biological parents are still here. If I'm not wrong, they will come to take him back soon." She poured a cup of wine and took a sip. "You can bear to return him to them?" Wan Yin Qianhua glanced at her and said, "So what if they are his biological parents? Didn't you pick him up because he was thrown away? Now that he is so big, you want to take him back when he is white and fat?" Fengzhou shook her head and sighed softly. "So what if I can't bear to? His biological parents are still here, and it is said that they were forced to do so. Now that they have found him, I can't force him to stay." "Who are his parents? How do you know he is here?" Wan Yin Qianhua asked. Fengzhou looked at her and said slowly, "Xuanwu Immortal." "Xuanwu Immortal?" Wan Yin Qianhua was stunned. She, who was leaning on the table as if she had no bones, couldn't help but sit up straight when she heard these words. She said with a serious expression, "You are saying that your son is Xuanwu Immortal's son?" "Yes." Fengzhou replied, "Isn't there a bald old man in my residence? His name is Elder Mei, and he came here for Hao. He's been here for 5 years, and he's been with Dufan and the others for the past 5 years. Now that we're back and Hao has grown up, his biological parents will naturally come to visit soon." TSK. I didn't expect this. Wan Yin Qianhua's eyes lit up. He smiled and said, "Your son is also a person with heaven-defying luck. You said that you saved him when his life was hanging by a thread. After you brought him back, you took him as your son and raised him by your side for 5 or 6 years. It's already amazing that he's your son. I didn't expect him to be the son of Xuanwu Immortal. Status doesn't bring any benefits." Fengzhou sighed and said, "If he was an ordinary child, he wouldn't have learned those things so early. However, his status forced him to adapt and learn those things." Hearing this, Wan Yin Qianhua seemed to have sensed something. The smile on her face disappeared. No one knew what she thought of, but she said slowly, "Yes, sometimes a good family background isn't a good thing." Only people like them knew that a good background and a good identity often meant that the responsibility on their shoulders was heavier. The things they had to learn and the things they had to bear were also more than ordinary people. The two drank quietly. No one in the courtyard disturbed them. After a while, Fangzhou looked at her and asked, "Sister, how are you in Zhenjushang?" Chapter 3350. Hearing this, Wanyan Qianhua's eyes flashed. She poured another cup of wine and said, "We had nothing to do with each other 5 years ago." Then she chuckled and said, "Ha! You should be saying that we never had anything to do with each other. That person never wanted to have anything to do with her. She was the only one who was stubborn." Hearing this and looking at her expression, Fangzhou was slightly surprised. In her opinion, although her sister said that they had nothing to do with each other, it didn't seem to be the case. Back then, when she first met her elder sister, she admired her from the bottom of her heart. She was so similar to her elder sister, so she naturally knew that her elder sister's standards were not low. Otherwise, she would not have been single for so many years. But she didn't expect that when she came to the upper world from the lower world, she met someone who moved her heart. She actually abandoned her pride to pursue love. What she didn't expect was that the person she fell in love with was the leader of the Xiaoyao school. It was said that the leader of the Xiaoyao school was hundreds of years old, Jun Jushang. Although age was not the focus of attention in the cultivation world, and there were many experts or big clans who had young and beautiful female cultivators by their side, she did not expect that her elder sister would fall in love with a man who was already hundreds of years old. When she heard her sister mention Jun Jushang, she wanted to meet him. She was curious from the bottom of her heart. A man who could move her sister, how outstanding would he be? She drank wine and thought about this. Seeing her sister finish one cup of wine after another, she couldn't help but chuckle and say, "Sister, it's easy to get drunk drinking like this. It's good to get drunk." Wanyan Qianhua said. She drank another cup of wine and said, "Ah Jiu, tell me, why doesn't he like me?" No matter where she went, Wanyan Qianhua was dazzling. Many young masters from big clans and sects admired her. But the person she loved treated her like dirt. Fangzhou supported her chin with one hand and looked at her without saying anything. After a while, she smiled and said, "Sister, I'll give you some of my treasured wine." As she spoke, she took out a bottle of wine from her space and poured her a cup. "Sister, have a taste." Wanyan Qianhua drank it in one gulp. After it entered her mouth, she glanced at Fangzhou. Her beautiful eyes were charming and blurred. "Immortal drunken wine? Hee, it's the drunken immortal. Does it taste better after the modification?" Fangzhou said with a smile. "Are you trying to get me drunk?" Wanyan Qianhua said as he poured himself another cup of wine. "It's nothing. I just wanted to let you try my improved immortal drunken wine." Fangzhou smiled embarrassedly. "How many cups do you think I'll get drunk?" Wanyan Qianhua asked and drank the third cup. Just as he was about to pour another cup, his eyes started to shake. Fangzhou pursed her lips and smiled. "No matter how strong you are, you must be drunk after 3 cups. Otherwise, how could it be said that it was improved?" She smiled and looked at Wanyan Qianhua, who was drunk and lying on the table, and called out to the outside. "Who's outside?" "Master." Qin Xian and Leng Shuang came in. "Help her back to her room to rest. Tell people not to disturb her and let her have a good sleep," Fangzhou said. He stood up and brushed his robe. A layer of light flashed across his body and dispersed the smell of wine on his body. Leng Shuang and Qin Xian responded and helped Wanyan Qianhua out. Chapter 3351. Fangzhou, who was about to go out, stopped when she heard Leng Hua's voice. She looked back and said, "Yes, I'm going out for a while. If Zay asks, tell him I'll be back later." Okay. Leng Hua didn't leave. Instead, he watched her turn and leave. Then he walked inside and happened to see Leng Shuang and Qin Xian walking side by side. He walked up to them. "Sister." Leng Hua called. Yes, what's the matter? Lung Shuang looked at him and asked. Today, only Luo Yu is guarding Hao outside. I wanted to let Gu Mo go, but he hasn't come back yet. I was thinking, sister, do you want to see Hao tonight? Hearing this, Lung Shuang nodded. Okay. She was also a little worried about Hao being outside. Would he be afraid at night? Lung Hua smiled and told her where Luo Yu was. After she left, he looked at Qin Exan and asked, Miss Wanyan is asleep? Qin Exan thought for a while and said, Yes, she's drunk. Master said she should rest well and not be disturbed. Okay. Then tell the servants not to disturb her rest. As he spoke, he lowered his voice and said, Pay more attention to Elder May and the gatekeeper. Master said that the Black Tortoise True Monarch should be paying us a visit soon. Okay. Qin Exan also agreed. After a while the two left. As the night deepened, the noises seemed to become quieter. In the celestial sect of the Blue Star, in a courtyard on a mountain, there was a bright room. Jun Jushang was wearing a white robe and sitting in the room. He was holding a book in his hand and looking at the book. However, his mind was somewhere else. Feng Jiu, who was dressed in red, quietly landed on a tree in the courtyard. She had restrained her aura and was like a gust of night wind. She did not make any sound and naturally did not attract the attention of the absent-minded Jun Jushang. Feng Jiu looked through the window at the man who was sitting and reading. When she saw him, she was stunned. He was hundreds of years old, but he looked like a man in his 30s. He was calm and cold. His temperament was different from the people she had seen before. Just by looking at the side of his face and his temperament, it had to be said that her sister's taste was indeed excellent. This kind of man was very unique and also very tasteful. Of course, in her opinion, he still couldn't compare to the one in her family. As the saying goes, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Jun Juishang, who was looking at the book, suddenly felt that someone was looking at him. Even if he didn't sense the other party's aura, he could feel the other party's gaze at this moment. Therefore, he who was reading the book picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. Suddenly, the teacup in his hand carried a fierce hidden force. It was like a hidden weapon, flying towards the window and towards the tree outside. Whoosh! The teacup flew past, creating a stream of air. Feng Jiu, who was staring at Jun Juishang, suddenly saw the teacup flying towards her. She couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. She raised her hand and slightly tilted her body to reduce the force on the teacup. Then, she reached out and caught the teacup. The moment the teacup flew out, Jun Juishang's heart skipped a beat. That was because he saw the red robe of the person hiding in the tree. When he saw the red robe, he immediately thought of Wanyan Chenhua. Chapter 3352. However, when that silhouette jumped down from the tree and entered his line of sight, he couldn't help but feel annoyed. It wasn't her. Feng Jiu held the cup in her hand and gently twirled it. She looked at Jun Juishang, who slowly closed his eyes after seeing her. She couldn't help but curl her lips into a smile. It seemed like he had mistaken her for her elder sister. Both of them liked to wear red clothes. No wonder he had mistaken her for her elder sister. She smiled and slowly walked inside with a cup in her hand. Feng Jiu. Jun Juishang looked at the woman who had walked in and asked with an indifferent expression. Even though he had asked that question, he looked confident. Obviously, even though he hadn't seen Feng Jiu before, he had guessed her identity. It's me. Feng Jiu smiled and nodded. She casually walked forward and sat down. She put the cup on the table and said, I have heard that the Xiao Yao sect's Jun Juishang is extraordinary. Today I see you in person. Indeed, hearing 100 times is not as good as seeing you once. You came to see me in the middle of the night. What's the matter? Asked Jun Juishang. He put down the book in his hand and calmly looked at the girl in front of him. Feng Jiu, the ghost doctor's name, could be said to have spread all over the world. However, he didn't have any relationship with her. Therefore, he was surprised to see her in the middle of the night. Feng Jiu took out a teacup and poured herself a cup of water to drink as she said, It's nothing. I just heard that you were here, so I wanted to come and see you. As she spoke, She played with the cup in her hand and smiled. Sect Master, you don't know, right? Wanyan Qianhua and I are sworn sisters. Jun Jushang's eyes twinkled when he heard that. He closed his eyes and didn't say anything. I don't like to talk in a roundabout way. I will just say it. She looked at him and said, My elder sister's taste is very high. There are so many outstanding men, but none of them can move her heart. I have always been curious. What kind of man will she fall in love with in the future? I didn't think that the patriarch would be like that. Did she ask you to come? Jun Jushang asked. Hearing this, Feng Jiu sneered and glanced at him. 5 years ago, my sister mentioned you to me. When we met again 5 years later, I asked about you, but my sister said that the two of you had nothing to do with each other 5 years ago. So, when I heard that the sect master was in this sect, I thought that since I had nothing to do, I would like to see what kind of person this man that my sister fell in love with is. But now that I've seen him, I feel that he's just SOSO. She had originally wanted to see what kind of person Jun Jushang was and what kind of feelings he had for her sister. However, when she heard his question, she shook her head inwardly. It seemed that this person really didn't care about her sister. Otherwise, why would he ask such a question? How could someone as proud as Wanyan Qianhua ask her to come? However, according to her observation from the beginning until now, she felt that he didn't completely ignore her sister in his heart. She guessed that he didn't realize the different feelings he had for her, right? It was also true that an old man who only knew how to cultivate, if you asked him to say or admit that he was moved by Wanyan Qianhua, it really wouldn't be so easy. Not to mention other things, just the age of these two people was like a mountain between them. Chapter 33:53. It's late. The ghost doctor should be going back, Jun Jushang said indifferently, as if he hadn't heard Feng Jiu. His expression was as indifferent as before. Feng Jiu smiled and glanced at him, saying, Yes, I'm going back. I just came here to take a look out of curiosity. She stood up, flicked her robe and walked out. However, when she reached the door, she paused and looked back at Jun Jushang. Oh right, sect master doesn't seem to be in a good state. He must have encountered his inner demon. It's better to get rid of it as soon as possible. If you keep running away, it will only make it harder to control. With that, she tapped the ground with the tip of her foot, and her red figure flew into the night. Seeing her leave, Jun Jushang's eyes darkened. He reached out and touched his chest. There was a complicated and struggling look in his eyes. Since 5 years ago, there had been no peace in this place. He was originally a light sleeper, but gradually he couldn't fall asleep. He knew that his inner demon had formed and could no longer be ignored on the other side. After Feng Jiu left Jun Jushang's place, CK and Mu Xian, who were waiting outside, saw her come out and greeted her. Master, it's already so late. Why don't you rest in the sect tonight? Master's cave residence has always been cleaned. You can move in at any time, CK said. Because it was so late, although she was very strong, they still felt that it wouldn't be too late for her to go down the mountain tomorrow morning. As for this, they didn't have to worry about her going back to Four Corner City in the middle of the night. Feng Jiu shook her head, saying, No need. I told them that I would go back tonight. It's not suitable for me to stay here. I don't want my family to worry. She looked at the two and said, You two go back too. There's no need to send me off. I can go out by myself. Then, she smiled, Don't worry. I won't meet any danger. Even if there is, it will be danger that meets me. When they heard this, CK and Mu Xian exchanged glances and said, Since Master has spoken in this way, then let's send Master out of the sect. If you send me off, the entire sect will probably know that I came at night tomorrow. Who knows what kind of trouble might happen? She smiled and waved her hand. All right, let's go back. As she spoke, her figure flashed and she had already flown into the night. CK couldn't help but sigh as he watched the figure disappear into the night in the blink of an eye. Master really comes and goes without a trace. There aren't many people in this world who can fight with her. Yes, both masters are very powerful. If it weren't for that bet, we wouldn't even be able to get close to her now, let alone be where we are today. Mu Xian also sighed. She only felt that many times, a split-second decision could change a person's life. The two of them stood there for a while before leaving as well. On the other side, Fengjiu, who had left the sect, was flying in the night. Her red figure was like a ghost as she shuttled through the darkness of the night, heading towards Four Corner City. However, just as she was about to leave the boundary of the sect, she unexpectedly noticed a few figures flitting through the forest. Their auras were actually demonic cultivators. Chapter 33:54. Her figure flashed and she retracted her aura and followed those people. She followed them in the night, but she didn't expect that she would follow them all the way to the back mountain of the sect. She raised her eyebrows slightly as she watched the devil cultivators enter the sect's back mountain. There were formations and barriers set up within the sect's territory. How were these devil cultivators able to enter the sect's back mountain as if there was no one around? Could it be that there was a spy? She followed closely and saw that these demonic cultivators had set up a barrier here. Once someone approached, the barrier would send out a warning, allowing the demonic cultivators to escape as quickly as possible. Looking at the darkness in front of her, her eyes flashed slightly. If it weren't for her cultivation, she probably wouldn't have been able to see that there was a barrier set up in the darkness. That layer of demonic power surged, and she could sense it without touching it. Her palm surged slightly, and a wave of spiritual aura surged. With a wave of her hand, the spiritual power in her palm quietly broke the barrier in front of her. Looking at the dissipated barrier and the dark demonic power that disappeared in the air, she curled her lips and walked forward. None of the demonic cultivators noticed that the barrier set up had been broken. At this time, more than 30 people were gathered together to discuss something. However, the two demonic cultivators who were originally talking stopped at the same time. They looked at each other, and one of them asked, "Did you feel it? Why do I feel that the barrier seems to have disappeared?" "You felt it too? Then it wasn't my imagination." The other demonic cultivator also said with a serious expression, "Who could it be? How could he break the barrier so soundlessly?" Hearing the two's words, the other demonic cultivators looked at each other. Someone asked, "What happened?" At this time, the two leaders calmed down and ordered, "You two, go outside and take a look. The rest of you stay alert." "No need, I'm already here." A gentle voice came from the night. Almost at the same time that they heard this voice, the two demonic cultivators in the lead were shocked, and they quickly looked in the direction of the voice. With their cultivation, they actually didn't know that someone was quietly approaching. Moreover, from the sound of that voice, it seemed to be a woman? Was it the female venerable from the sect on Cerulean Planet? However, when that person walked out from the shadows, the expressions of those devil cultivators changed, and even their voices were trembling uncontrollably. Fengjiu. The person in front of him was dressed in red. She had a beautiful face and a cold temperament. There was a faint smile on her lips. Who else could it be but Fengjiu? Almost at the moment they saw Fengjiu, the 30 or so demonic cultivators all retreated at the same time. They knew that Shenyuan Mo's and Fengjiu's strength was no longer the same as yesterday, especially when Shenyuan Mo's had agreed to fight Sovereign Tong Tian at Mount E. Now that they had encountered Fengjiu here, they really wanted to die. This was the back mountain of the Cerulean Planet sect. What was she doing here in the middle of the night instead of staying in Square City? Could it be that she found out about their plan? Fengjiu's clear eyes swept past those devil cultivators, and she chuckled. "I haven't met a devil cultivator in a long time. Tell me, what are you all doing here in the middle of the night?" Chapter 33:55. Let's go. Hearing her words, everyone's hearts trembled, especially the two devil cultivators in the lead. Almost without thinking, they threw out something from their sleeves. That thing hit the ground with a loud bang, and at the same time, black smoke filled the air. The devil cultivators took the opportunity to quickly scatter and escape. Fengjiu frowned. With a wave of her sleeve, she dispersed the smoke in front of her. At the same time, she released her pressure, and with a whoosh, a silver needle flew out from her hand, piercing the devil cultivators who were escaping in all directions. Those devil cultivators were too slow to escape, and after being pierced by the silver needle, they fell to the ground. Only the 2 devil cultivators in the lead escaped with their lives, and because of the loud bang, the people in the sect were alarmed. A venerable brought his disciples to the back of the mountain to investigate, and when they quickly followed the direction of the sound, they couldn't help but be startled. "Ghost Doctor!" The venerable in the lead recognized Fengjiu, and then looked at the 20 devil cultivators on the ground, and hurriedly asked, "Ghost Doctor, what happened? Why did devil cultivators sneak into the sect's back mountain out of the blue?" Fengjiu glanced at the person who came, then glanced at the devil cultivators on the ground and said, "I just happened to pass by and saw a few devil cultivators walking around in the sect's territory, so I followed to take a look. But I didn't expect that there were dozens of people hiding here. The rest of them bit the poison and committed suicide. These 2's chins were cut off by me. You guys bring them back for interrogation." She kicked the 2 devil cultivators at her feet. "Yes, thank you, Ghost Doctor." Hearing this, the venerable quickly thanked her, and ordered the disciples behind him to bring back the 2 devil cultivators who were still alive. However, when he turned around and was about to say a few more words to Fengjiu, he saw that the red figure who was standing in front of him just now had already disappeared. "Master, she left," a disciple said softly. Deal with this corpse, then report back to the sect," the venerable said as he led them to dispose of the corpses. Then he patrolled the surroundings before heading into the sect. Fengjiu, who was heading towards the city, stepped on the breeze and quietly entered the city. She didn't head towards the manor, but instead headed towards the slums that Wanyan Qianhua had told her about. It had only been a day. She really missed that little fellow. She wondered if he had gotten used to sleeping on his first night outside. She released her divine sense and soon found Luo Yu. She walked up to the tree he was on and saw that Leng Shuang was also there. She couldn't help but smile. "Why is Leng Shuang here too? Do you miss Hao?" "Master." When the 2 saw her, they hurriedly bowed and greeted her. "Guimo isn't back yet, so I came over to take a look," Leng Shuang said. "Master, it's so late. Why aren't you resting yet?" Luo Yu looked at her. He didn't expect her to come over so late. Was she worried about Hao? "I just came back from a trip to the sect, so I wanted to see Hao before going back." Fengjiu looked at the house and asked the 2 about Hao's situation. After hearing about Hao's situation, she smiled and said, "Leng Shuang, come in with me to take a look." "Yes." Leng Shuang responded and followed her into the house. "Master, those little beggars are sleeping in the bunk over there. Hao is sleeping in this room." Leng Shuang lowered his voice as he led her in. When they arrived at the room, Fengjiu smiled when she heard the calm breathing inside. Chapter 33:56. She walked forward and pulled the blanket up for Hao. Looking at his dirty little face, Fengjiu shook her head and smiled. She didn't stay for long and left after sitting by the bed for a while. When she was outside, Fengjiu looked at Leng Shuang and said, "You and Luo Yu stay here tonight. I'll have someone take your place tomorrow." "Yes." Leng Shuang replied. After watching her leave, he went to the tree where Luo Yu was. When Fengjiu returned to the residence, she saw Xianyuan Mose sitting on the bed with his eyes closed. When he heard her coming in, he opened his eyes and looked at her. "You're still awake. It's very late," Fengjiu said as she walked forward. She took off her outer clothes and walked forward wearing only her inner clothes. Just as she was about to turn over and sleep on the bed, he hugged her. "You went to see Hao?" Xianyuan Mose hugged her and let her sit on his body. Fengjiu smiled and reached out to hug him. She leaned her head on his chest and said, "I went to the sect to see Junju Shang. Then I went to see Hao when I came back." "Oh, for Wanyan Qianhua?" "Yes," she replied and said, "I'm also curious. What kind of person is Junju Shang? After seeing him tonight, I can't deny that he's very outstanding." "More outstanding than me?" Xianyuan Mose raised his eyebrows. His deep eyes were smiling. Hearing this, Fengzhou chuckled and leaned forward to peck his lips. In my eyes, no one can compare to you. Hearing this, Shenyuan Mo's heart moved. Like a flower blooming, a smile appeared on his cold face. He looked at her in his arms and said, Ajo's words are very moving. I like it very much. As he spoke, he lowered his head and kissed her lips. It wasn't a light kiss, but a deep and passionate kiss. The night was dark, and the crescent moon was hidden in the clouds. In the room, two figures were entwined on the bed like a pair of mandarin ducks. On the other hand, in the Sanctum of Sages, the members of the Sanctum of Sages were already waiting in the main hall early in the morning. As they waited, they began chatting with one another. Looks like the saint will come out today. He has been in seclusion for 5 years. Yes, that's fast. 5 years have passed in the blink of an eye. I wonder how much the saint's strength has improved in 5 years? Recently, I heard that Sovereign Tongtian and Shenyuan Mo's are going to battle at Mount E. Shenyuan Mo's strength is already at the God King level. Not bad, not bad. I heard that he is very young and is a cultivation genius rarely seen in 1,000 years. You don't know about this, do you? An old man stroked his beard and chuckled. He looked at the crowd and lowered his voice. Shenyuan Mo's is the Emperor Star, and he complements Fengzhou's Phoenix Star. If not for the fact that they are destined by the heavens, do you think that anyone can be like them? They are indeed very powerful, but our Holy Sun is not an ordinary person either. Another person said with a smile, just wait and see. The saint's strength will definitely be on par with Shenyuan Mo's. Divine King level? Is that possible? After all, Divine King level isn't something that can be achieved just by thinking about it. Back then, I heard that if the Holy Sun could cut off all emotions and desires, his cultivation method would reach the great accomplishment stage. The power of that would be indescribable. Chapter 33:57. As the voice rang out, everyone's gaze turned towards the source of the voice. Mo Chen's white robe fluttered in the wind as he walked towards them. His otherworldly aura and the faint holy light that radiated from his body made him look extremely noble. If it was said that he had the temperament of a banished immortal in the past, the current him exuded an indescribable sense of nobility. It was as if looking at him for an extra second would be a blasphemy, especially the faint layer of holy light that surrounded his body. It was as if he was bathed in holy light. He seemed to be right in front of them, but at the same time he was out of their reach. Holy Prince! Everyone called out excitedly as they lowered their heads in unison and bowed respectfully. Mo Chun walked to the center of the hall and stood there quietly. His deep gaze swept across the crowd before him and he said, "You may all disperse. Elders, please stay behind." Yes. Everyone responded and bowed their heads respectfully as they left the hall. In a short while, only the elders and Mo Chun were left in the large hall of sages. The elders exchanged glances and stepped forward. They cupped their fists and bowed. Congratulations to the Holy Prince for coming out of seclusion. Mo Chun glanced at them, then turned around and sat down in the center of the hall. He ordered, "Tell me about Fengzhou and the others in the past 5 years." Hearing this, the elders paused for a moment before stepping forward. They sat down on the chairs on his left and right and briefly recounted the events of the past few years. Finally, the first elder said, "The Holy Prince came out of seclusion at just the right time. Some time ago, the Cerulean Star sect sent people to ask for our help in the battle against Sovereign Tongtian. However, because Shenyuan Mo's and Fengzhou returned, things took a turn for the better. Now, Shenyuan Mo's and Sovereign Tongtian have agreed to battle at the peak of Mount E. There are still more than 20 days until now." At this time, the third elder said, "It's said that Shenyuan Mo's is already a God King expert, but no one knows what level he is." The second elder's eyes were fixed on Mo Chen. He looked at him, paused for a moment, and said, "Saint, before the temple master went into seclusion, he told us that after the saint comes out of the sacred tower, we have to see if the saint has severed all emotions and desires, severed all ties of love, and obtained the saint power. Saint, do you think, in other words, He wanted Yifutian to tell them that he had already inherited the saint energy from the holy sanctum while cultivating in the holy tower for the past 5 years. When Emo-chan heard this, the corners of his lips curled into a slight smile. He looked at the elder and asked, "Elder, in your opinion, have I already severed my 7 emotions and 6 desires? Have you obtained saint energy?" The second elder hesitated. How could he know whether or not he had severed his feelings for her? Did he not have the 7 emotions and 6 desires? He only knew that the layer of saint energy around his body was stronger than before. Perhaps he had already obtained the saint energy from the holy tower? For a moment, the few elders did not speak, but their eyes fell on Emo-chan, sizing him up. They were not sure either, but seeing that he could come out of seclusion, he should have obtained the saint energy from the holy tower. "I'm going back to rest for a while, and will leave tomorrow. You can inform the temple master that he has come out of seclusion," Emo-chan said as he stood up, one hand behind his back and the other in front of him. Without waiting for them to speak, he walked towards the back of the hall. Chapter 33:58. Emo-chan slowly walked towards the back of the palace. His steps were light and leisurely. As he walked, he looked at the sky. No one knew what he was thinking, but a dark light flashed across his deep eyes. He walked towards the back of the palace and returned to the main courtyard to rest. At the same time, he prepared to leave the divine palace tomorrow to meet Fengjiu and the others 2 days later. Outside the sky of the upper world, in another region, in a palace, a man dressed in a dark golden robe with a strong waist and a bear's back was striding towards the main palace. His footsteps were like the wind. Every step he took carried a thunderous and fierce aura. He strode in. Before he saw anyone inside, he spoke first. Wife, what's wrong? Why do you look like you're in a hurry?" A beautiful woman in luxurious clothes came out to welcome him. Although she was dressed gorgeously, she did not look well. Her face was pale. The man, Sovereign Xuanwu, strode to her side. He laughed loudly and said, "Wife, Elder Mei sent news. Our son came back with Fengjiu and the others. He's now in Four Corner City." "Ah, our son is back. Is he okay?" The beautiful woman sobbed. Tears fell from her eyes. She could not speak. When she thought of their child, she felt as if her heart was being cut by a knife. He was her biological child, but he could not grow up by her side. He was already 5 or 6 years old, but she had not seen him even once. How tall was he now? Was he fat or thin? Did he know that there was a mother like her? "Wife, don't cry. This is good news," Sovereign Xuanwu said. He reached out and pulled her into his arms. He said, "We had no choice back then. Now that he's growing well, you don't have to worry. Husband, we were incompetent parents. We only gave birth to him, but we never raised him. Husband, do you think he won't recognize us?" The beautiful woman asked with tears falling from her eyes. She was anxious and worried. This monarch Black Tortoise was stunned. He had never thought of this problem. However, he still comforted them. "He won't. He's our son. As long as we tell him clearly that we had no choice back then, I don't think he won't recognize us." The gorgeously dressed beauty leaned into his embrace and asked again, "Husband, will they be willing to return the child to us? After all, they've raised the child for 5 or 6 years. I'm afraid their relationship is no less than ours." "Don't worry. Fengjiu and Shenyuan Mo's aren't ordinary people. Naturally, they're different from ordinary people. It's our son's fortune to have a pair of adoptive parents like them. Besides, if they don't want to return the child to us, they wouldn't have agreed to let Elder Mei deliver the message to us." Although he had never met Shenyuan Mo's and Fengjiu, he was no stranger to them. He had been looking forward to meeting them. The beauty fell silent for a moment, and then she thought for a moment and said, "Husband, let's go take a look first. If our son wants to follow them, let him follow. As long as he can come back to visit us often in the future, I'll be satisfied." Hearing this, Sovereign Xuanwu was stunned. He asked with a smile, "Don't you miss your son? Don't you want to bring him back and raise him by your side?" Chapter 33:59. She was worried that her son could not bear to part with Fengjiu and the others. She was also worried that if she brought him back against his wishes, he would be unhappy. After she gave birth to him, he was separated from her. Although mother and son were connected, she was also worried that her child would not grow up by their side and would not be close to them. Sovereign Black Tortoise looked at her. After a while, he said, I heard that the old man from Tongtian and Shenyuan Mose have agreed to fight at Mount E. There are only 20 days left. That old man has fought with me for so many years. I know his strength very well. I'm afraid that Shenyuan Mose, who has just become a divine king, is not his match. So I was thinking of taking advantage of this time to discuss with them and see if there is anything we can help with. This way, we can repay them for raising our son. Secondly, I also want to meet Fengjiu. According to Elder Mei, she has medical skills that can bring the dead back to life. I only hope to have the opportunity to heal my old injuries this time. Then I'll go to the storehouse to find some good things. I'll bring them over as a greeting gift. As the beauty spoke, she frowned and looked worried. But if both of us leave, won't others take advantage of us? Tongtian's people are not the only ones keeping an eye on us. It's okay. We'll disguise ourselves as ordinary cultivators. No one will know that we're not in the palace. Besides, I'll make the arrangements. Even if someone comes again, it's okay. He patted her hand, indicating that she did not need to worry. Okay, then I'll go prepare first. Let's leave tomorrow. She could not wait to see her son. Okay. Sovereign Black Tortoise smiled. To them, it did not take long to go to Four Corner City from here. It only took the time of a transportation array. While they were preparing, the people in Four Corner City were also busy with their own matters. In the main courtyard, Fengjiu and Wanyan Qianhua were playing chess while listening to Luo Yu's report on how Er's matters outside these few days. Speaking of which, I haven't visited Hao in the past few days. Today's weather looks pretty good. Sis, let's go together. Fengjiu looked at Wanyan Qianhua and said. Wanyan Qianhua raised her beautiful eyes to look at Fengjiu. After thinking for a moment, she said, That's a good idea. That child has been outside for a few days. Since he has been performing well these past few days, why don't we pick him up later and bring him to a restaurant to eat something? Fengjiu stood up when he heard this, and he said to Luo Yu, Since Wei Feng and Guemo are guarding Hao then you can rest at home. Yes, Luo Yu replied and then retreated. Fengjiu and Wanyan Qianhua walked forward and happened to bump into Guan Shilin. Fengjiu called out, Brother, we're going to see Hao Are you coming with us? That's fine too. I have nothing to do anyway. Guan Shilin said as he walked towards them. Master, let Qin Xian and my sister go together. It'll be more convenient for Master to do whatever he wants with them. Leng Hua walked over from nearby with Leng Shuang and Qin Xian by his side. Fengjiu smiled when he saw this and said, All right, there are so many people here. Let's take the Spirit Deer carriage. With that, he walked out with Wanyan Qianhua. Then we'll be leaving. When we come back, we'll bring back some spiced beef to go with wine. Guan Shilin said to Leng Hua, and he walked out with a smile. Chapter 33:60. On the other side, in the dilapidated house, Hao walked in with his short legs and shouted, I'm back! He had adapted to life these few days, and there was some excitement in his tone. He thought that if his mother knew that he could be independent and could feed so many people, she would be very happy. The little beggars in the house heard Hao's voice and quickly ran out. They all surrounded him. What's good to eat today? Is there meat today? Come here, Hao shouted. He came to the table at the side and took out the things from his chenkuan bag. The little beggar's eyes flashed when they saw him take out the things from the small bag and put them on the table. In particular, a few of the older beggars stared straight at Hao's bag. You guys eat first. I'll go in and drink a cup of water. Hao said to them. After putting the food on the table, he walked in. He lived in a room by himself, so when he came in, he climbed onto the chair and poured a cup of water. When he was about to drink it, he was stunned when he smelled the water. He thought that he smelled it wrongly, so he went closer to smell it. Someone put medicine in the water? Who did it? He thought in a daze. Because his mother also taught him how to identify medicine in Danwang Valley, he could easily smell that the medicine in the water was muscle-weakening powder, and it was the cheapest kind. His mother helped him recuperate his body. Not to mention this, even poison couldn't poison him. However, after living outside for a few days, he knew that he had to be clear about everything. He couldn't be careless. Therefore, he planned to beat them at their own game and see who wanted to harm him. Outside, the little beggars were eating happily. The older ones looked into the room from time to time. Because of nervousness, the hands holding the food trembled slightly. It wasn't until they heard the sound of cups breaking and falling that they put down the food in their hands and ran in quickly. When they saw Hao lying on the ground with cold sweat on his face and a weak look on his face, the youngest girl quickly went forward to help him up. "What happened to you?" Hao leaned on the little girl and said, I suddenly have no strength in my body. Ah, how can this be? The little girl asked worriedly. "Does your body hurt?" The medicine is working," the older beggar suddenly said excitedly. Hearing this, a few of the younger ones were startled and looked at him in astonishment. "What did you say? Take the bag from him. There's a lot of money and a lot of treasures." As the older beggar spoke, they suddenly pushed the youngest girl away and went to snatch the inconspicuous bag tied around Hao's waist. Woo! The little girl was pushed aside and her body fell to the side. Her hand pressed on the broken cup and blood immediately flowed out. She sobbed but climbed up and squeezed forward to protect Hao. "Don't take his things. Don't take his things." Chapter 33:61. Hao pursed his lips and stared coldly at the few beggars when he saw the little girl standing in front of him and using her bleeding hand to slap the bigger beggars. "Go away!" One of the beggars pushed the little girl away, but she pounced on him again. At this moment, the bigger beggar shouted at the other beggars, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and help. After we snatch his bag, we'll give you some silver." The beggars were originally a little afraid, but when they heard the last sentence, their eyes lit up. They hurriedly went forward to help pull the little girl away and pressed her firmly to the ground. Hao sat leaning against the corner of the table, looking weak and motionless. He watched as the beggars worked together to deal with him and even pressed the little girl to the ground. At this moment, the little guy felt a fire burning in his heart, until he saw the Chenkuan bag at his waist being snatched away by those beggars and saw them taking out the things inside in front of him. He asked, "Why are you snatching my things?" He saved them and brought back delicious food for them. Why did they still want to snatch his things? "These aren't your things. These are the things you snatched from those two people. Why should they only give their things to you?" the bigger beggar said. He looked curiously at the few Dharma treasures taken out from the Chenkuan bag and played with them excitedly. Hao looked at them fixedly. No one knew what he was thinking. After a long time, he said, "I'm too good to you." His mother had told him that one should not have the heart to harm others, but one should always be on guard against others. Before this, he felt that these beggars would not harm him because he had saved them and they were very weak. However, after today's incident, he understood some things. Some things that he would only understand after experiencing it himself. What happened today was a lesson for him. If it wasn't for his ability to distinguish between medicines, if it wasn't for the fact that he wasn't afraid of these medicines, then he could only lie here powerlessly and be robbed of everything on him or even his life. Let's break one of his legs and one of his hands, so that he won't find trouble with us after the effects of the medicine wear off. One of the beggars said as he stared at Hao who was leaning there. He inexplicably felt that his eyes made him fearful. Because of fear, he wanted to destroy him. He was afraid that once he recovered, they would be caught by him. Therefore, he could only cripple him while he could not move. Hearing this, the beggars all looked at each other. The smaller ones were a little scared. We don't dare. How about this? We'll leave this square city and go somewhere else. He won't be able to find us. Just in case, it's better to break his hands. This guy is too ruthless. You've forgotten that he killed people before. If he recovers, he will definitely kill us. Oh, he still has a dagger. As he said this, the bigger one was about to search his body. At this moment, the little girl who was pressed to the ground cried out, "No, no, don't break his arms and legs. Don't, woo woo." With them, were of him, were. Chapter 3362. Due to the strength of that kick, the little girl let out a muffled groan and spat out a trace of blood from her mouth. Seeing this, Hao-er's face darkened and the aura on his body became extremely cold. He stared at the beggar who came forward and reached out to grab his hand and break it. Crack! The sound of bones breaking was heard and instantly frightened all the beggars. Just as the beggar screamed, Hao-er's voice was heard. "Looking for the dagger? Is here." Hao-er's voice was heard and the inconspicuous but sharp dagger had appeared in his hand. With a flash of cold light, he directly broke the tendons in the beggar's hand. As the beggar screamed, the blade turned and directly pierced his foot, breaking the tendons in his foot. Shrill screams sounded and scared the little beggars out of their wits. However, Hao-er took a big step forward and blocked everyone's escape. Seeing the little beggars who were originally running towards the door retreating with pale faces, he said coldly, "Did I allow you to leave? Don't kill us. We don't want to die." The little beggars cried and begged and directly knelt down. "It's not me, it's not my idea, it's him, it's his idea, it's none of our business," the older beggars said as they pointed at the beggar who was lying on the ground and screaming. Not far outside, Fangzhou and Wanyan Chenhua stood on a tree and watched. They originally wanted to see what Hao-er was doing and did not expect to see such a scene. "What do you think your son will do?" Wanyan Chenhua asked. Fangzhou's eyes flashed and said, "Cripple one of their hands and one of their legs, just like the beggar inside. However, I don't think he will do anything to those little beggars who are in a passive position." Wanyan Chenhua shook his head and sighed softly. "This child has already been raised into a monster by all of you, yet you still let him out to train. If he trains too much, he will mature too early. Look at what he's going through now. It's not something an ordinary child would experience." Fengzhou nodded in agreement. "Yes, I didn't expect him to grow so quickly. It's only been a few days, but his ability to adapt and be independent is beyond my expectations." The two of them watched from the tree. They didn't intend to show themselves to help. They just wanted to see how he would deal with it. In that dilapidated courtyard, Hao-er really did as Fengzhou said. He crippled a hand and a leg of a few of the bigger beggars. As for those who were in a passive position, he did not touch them. "Leave. You're not allowed to appear in Four Corner City. Otherwise, if I see you again, I won't let you off like this time," Hao-er warned. After watching those people rush out of the door, he went to the little girl's side and helped her up. "I'll bandage you." As Hao-er spoke, he put away the Cosmos sack and all the things on the ground back into the sack. The little girl clearly hadn't recovered yet. She stared blankly at him. You didn't use the medicine?" "Yes," Hao-er replied with a straight face. After applying medicine for her, he used a strip of cloth to bandage her hand. When he sensed that someone was coming, he looked up. When he saw that familiar figure, his eyes couldn't help but light up. He quickly stood up and pounced on the figure that was slowly walking over. Chapter 3363. Hao-er ran forward. Just as he was about to pounce forward, he remembered that he was dirty and couldn't help but stop. Fengzhou bent down and was about to catch him, but he retreated. She couldn't help but smile. "What's wrong? You haven't seen your mother for a few days. You don't want your mother to carry you?" Hao-er's little face reddened. "Mother, Hao-er is dirty." When they appeared, Wei Feng and Guemo, who were hiding in the shadows, had already been ordered to take the little beggars who had fainted from the pain of having their tendons cut off. In the large courtyard, there was only Fengzhou's group and the little girl who walked out with her short legs and looked at them blankly. Those people were so beautiful, and the clothes they wore were so nice. However, why did the little beggar call the woman in red his mother? Feng squatted down with a smile and pulled Hao in front of her. She smiled and said, "It's fine. You'll be fine after you go back and take a bath and change your clothes." "But mother, it hasn't even been 10 days. He also wanted to go home and see his mother, but his mother said that she had to adapt to the outside world for 10 days. Hao's performance has been very good these past few days. Then there's no need for 10 days. Mother specially came to take Hao to eat." She rubbed his head and smiled at the little girl behind him. "If you like that little girl, bring her home." At this time, the little girl carefully walked forward and tugged at Hao's tattered sleeve. "Little beggar, why do you call her mother? Do you want to go with them? Then what about me? She's my mother." Hao thought for a moment and said, "Follow me." "Yes, yes," the little girl happily responded. She then looked at the beauty in red who was looking at her with a smile and asked in a small voice, "Why do you have a mother?" Feng smiled and stood up. She held Hao's hand and said, "Let's go." She brought him out and said, "This is mother's sworn sister, Wanyan Qianhua. You can call her Aunt Hua." "Aunt Hua," Hao called and looked at her. "Good girl," Wanyan Qianhua replied with a smile. He said to the little girl, "Come with us." Thus, they brought the two children to the restaurant. On the other side of the restaurant, Ruoda restaurant was closed at this time. Inside the restaurant, the waiters were busy, and Leng Shuang and Qin Xian were waiting behind. When they saw Fengjiu and Wanyan Qianhua returning with Hao and a little girl, the two went up to greet them. "Master, Leng Shuang, go to the clothing store and buy a few sets of clothes for the little girl. Qin Xian, have the waiter prepare some water for them to bathe in." Fengjiu instructed and brought the two children to the courtyard of the restaurant. "Yes." The two of them replied and immediately turned to leave. The shopkeeper personally brought the two children to bathe, and Fengjiu and Wanyan Qianhua sat in the courtyard. Wanyan Qianhua poured a glass of wine and said, "Are you going to leave the little girl with Hao?" "Yes, she looks like a good girl, but she still needs to be trained," Fengjiu said and took a sip of wine. Not long after, Guan Shilin came in from outside. You're back? I just went out to buy some things. Come, try the spiced beef I brought back," Guan Shilin said and took out a portion for them. He looked around and asked, "Where's Hao? Did you bring him back?" Chapter 3364. Yes, we have to prepare in advance. Guan Shilin nodded and said, "Now that the news has spread, people from all over the world will probably come to Mount E to watch the battle between Moze and Sovereign Tongtian in a month's time. Although Moze is now at the Divine King level, we don't know if Sovereign Tongtian has any ultimate moves, so we have to be careful." "I know," Fengjiu replied. She took a sip of wine from her glass. In the backyard, Leng Shuang put on the newly bought clothes for the little girl and said to her, "Let's go." As soon as she finished speaking, she walked out. Outside, Hao who had already bathed and changed into clean clothes, was waiting at the door. When he saw the door open and an adult and a child walk out, he walked forward and called out, "Aunt Shuang, your mother and the others are in front. Let's go." Leng Shuang said and held his hand as they walked forward. Behind them, the little girl touched her new clothes lovingly. It was the first time she had worn such clean and beautiful new clothes, so she was very happy. When she heard the sound, she looked up and saw the woman in black holding the hand of a child who was the same age as her. The child didn't turn around, so she couldn't see his face. However, after thinking about it, she still followed behind them. Her eyes darted around from time to time as she looked at the small figure with curiosity and surprise, trying to guess his identity. Mother, uncle, Aunt Hua. Hao followed Leng Shuang in and jogged to Fengjiu's side, calling out to the three of them one by one. Fengjiu reached out and picked him up. "You look good after you've washed up." She carried him to a chair and sat him down. "Mother ordered a lot of dishes. Take a look and see what you like to eat." "Thank you, Mother," Hao said and picked up his chopsticks to eat. Fengjiu looked at the little girl standing at the side. She smiled and asked, "What's your name?" I don't have a name," The little girl lowered her head and said. Fengzhou thought about it and said, I can find a family to adopt you and let you grow up safely. You can also stay and be my son's servant. Which one do you want to choose? Hearing this, the little girl was stunned. She looked at Hao who was eating, and asked, He's a little beggar? Why did he look different? Only his voice was the same? He's not a little beggar, he's my son. Fengzhou said and looked at the little girl. What do I do as a servant? Is it to play with him? She asked in confusion. Maidservant, in the future, someone will naturally tell you what you want to do. Right now, you only need to tell me which one you want to choose. I'll stay and follow him. The little girl looked at Hao. Seeing this, Fengzhou said, If you stay, from this moment onwards, you will be called master, and your life will no longer be yours. Are you still willing to stay? Yes. The little girl nodded. Fengzhou said, All right, from today on you'll be called Little Five. He glanced at Leng Shuang. Leng Shuang walked forward and said to the little girl, Come with me. The little girl looked at Hao and saw that he didn't speak or look at her. She lowered her head and followed Leng Shuang downstairs. Chapter 3365. Fengzhou smiled. Keep her for now. We'll see. She's just a little girl anyway. How big of a deal was that? If this little girl was obedient and kept her place, then she could stay. If she was prone to betrayal in the future, then she could be erased. In her opinion, she had given the opportunity. Whether she could seize it or resist all the temptations in the future would depend on the situation. After all, not everyone was as loyal as Leng Shuang and Leng Hua. She said these words in front of Hao because she wanted him to know that he should be wary of others. However, she believed that after experiencing life these past few days, he should have seen through a lot of human affairs. Hao lowered his head and ate. He didn't speak but listened carefully. He picked up a piece of meat for Fengzhou and said, Mother, eat. Good boy, Hao, eat more. Fengzhou smiled and patted his head. Then he also picked up his chopsticks. Guan Shilin laughed loudly. Come, come, come. Let's eat. After eating, take Hao out for a walk. Go shopping and buy some small things. You haven't taken him around since you came back. That's true. Fengzhou looked at Hao and said, Hao, how about we go shopping with you after eating? Okay. Hao answered. Because he thought that they would accompany him to play in the city, he sped up. When they saw this, they shook their heads and laughed. They chatted while drinking wine. On the first floor, the little girl looked at the food on the table. There was meat, vegetables, and snacks. She was dazzled and happy. Are these all for me? She looked at Leng Shuang and asked. Yes, eat. Leng Shuang said. He turned and walked upstairs. Seeing him leave, the little girl immediately reached out to pick up something to eat. When the waiter in the corner saw this, he quickly walked out. Don't use your hands. Use chopsticks. Oh, the little girl answered. She picked up her chopsticks and ate. Her eyes were bright as she asked, Who are they? Is their family rich? When the waiter heard this, he sneered, Eat your food. This little girl's luck was good. But whether she could bear it or not, that was hard to say. Not long after, Wei Feng and Guemo also came to the restaurant. They approached Fengzhou and said, Master, it's already taken care of. Fengzhou responded and waved his hand, indicating for them to leave. Mother, how are those people? Hao asked. He knew that Wei Feng and the others had gone to deal with those little beggars that he'd crippled. Actually, he'd only crippled an arm and a leg, and he could already be considered to have been merciful. Out of Foursquare City. Fengzhou looked at Hao and said, Many times, being lenient will bring endless trouble to yourself. When it's time to make a decision, you have to be decisive. You can't hesitate, understand? Yes. Hao responded. After he finished eating the food in his bowl, he said, Mother, there's a place to row boats in the west of the city. Mother, I want to row a boat there. Okay, Mother will take you there. Fengzhou smiled and took Hao out with them. On the other hand, Leng Shuang brought the little girl back to the estate. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.